You already touched on some of the key features of the R3, but given that it's the only bookshelf in the range, I wanted to just do a little bit more detail on it. So what else is there that you can tell us about R3 Meta?
Yeah, the R3 Meta is actually quite a special speaker. So it's the only stand mount in the range, or dedicated stand mount, and yet it is a three-way speaker. It has the UniQ with mid-range and tweeter, but also a dedicated low-frequency driver. This is very important because even though it's a stand mount, it has the bass performance of a much bigger speaker, certainly a floor stander or a small floor stander. You know, the importance of having a dedicated mid-range as well is that it allows us to have much lower distortion, so we can keep the level of distortion as low as the bigger speakers, like the R5, R7, etc., and yet have the bass performance that we would want from one driver that needs to move a lot, right? On the other hand, you can also see on the back that the port, there is a bass reflex port that is positioned in a particular portion of the baffle asymmetrically. It has been positioned in such a way, also in the back. This allows us to avoid the leakage of acoustical resonances that happen naturally inside an enclosure. In any enclosure, particularly long enclosures, they will tend to resonate, right? Unfortunately, around the area where you start crossing over from the woofer to the mid-range, and that can result in quite a muddy sounding chesty voice or like cello or any instrument that is within this region. By positioning optimizing the position of the port, we don't allow these resonances to leak out because we couple the port to the portion of the resonance that doesn't vibrate, so to speak. Yeah, and well, maybe you cannot see it from here, but the inside of the port is actually flexible. So this is one thing that only KEF does, and we've been doing it since LS50. The wall inside the port is a tube, right? So the wall inside, it's made of a special rubber that expands when the natural resonance of the port, because it is a tube, excites it. So instead of that resonance, again, leaking into the room and you listening to it whistling, basically, like a whistle, it dissipates that energy into heat because the rubber expands and it doesn't let the port whistle.
So how did you go about selecting the optimal position? Like what goes into finding the best placement for that reflex port?
Well, we sort of start with a compromise situation of where we need to put the low frequency driver, right? You ideally want the woofer to be right in the middle of the baffle, because of the acoustics of a long enclosure, which acts like a tube, essentially, not a very long tube. That position of the woofer won't excite the first longitudinal resonance, or the first sort of like tube resonance. If you start with something like this, where you need to put the woofer on the bottom because we want to keep the speaker of a certain size and a certain form factor, etc., then the best we can do is put the port wherever it doesn't couple to the resonances that the woofer will be exciting. And then on top of that, carefully select where inside the enclosure we put the damping material, in this case the bath wadding or special foam for the case of the mid-range, so that it absorbs as much of that resonance as possible before it has a chance to leak through anywhere else, either the cabinet walls or the port.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of engineering has gone into what's a reasonably small package overall. Yeah,
I mean, we essentially we design all of these in the computer with very careful and representative models. By the time we reach the phase in which we have a working prototype, it will pretty much resemble our simulations, almost carbon copy. So we're pretty sure that we iterate these designs through careful characterization of our systems and and mathematical tools, so that by the time that we build a speaker, it already performs the way we want to.
I suppose that's sort of testament to the 60-year heritage that has gone in with KEF's engineering all over these decades.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, KEF has always been very clear about its approach to loudspeaker design, through the use of the scientific method and what I would call a triangular view between computer simulation, measurements, and listening. And between those three, you can make sure that you're designing speakers that actually will objectively perform well, but also subjectively result in a musical reproduction that's enjoyable, believable, and exciting.
Because that's the most important thing at the end of the day, isn't it? I suppose you can do all these computer simulations and whatever else, but ultimately it's the performance of the speakers that count.
Well, that is all that we want to do, really. At the end of the day, we want to make speakers that disappear in a way. We want to make speakers that don't sound like speakers. We want to put a musical signal through the speakers and make your brain believe that it's right in front of the real thing.